Hi, I'm Dr. Sridhar Ganapathy, a practicing pediatrician from Mumbai. Welcome to the Steer channel, an educative initiative by my teacher, Dr. Y.K. Amdekar. The topic for the day, drugs in renal disorder. So, like I always mention, it's very essential for us to understand before we get into rational therapeutics. So, what does the kidney do? The kidney's functioning unit is called as the nephron. And the basic function is excretion of waste and retaining what is needed for the body. So, fluid and electrolyte balance, acid base balance, erythropoiesis through erythropoietin that is generated by the kidney, a little bit of vitamin D, that is the 125 dihydroxy cholecalciferol, is generated by the kidney from 25 hydroxy D3, and the renin that also comes from the kidney, and the very important renin angiotensin aldosterone system, vascular tone, sodium water retention, and much more. In the limited time that I have been given, let me try to complete as many important things as possible. But there is a reminder right in the beginning. We are starting a new subset to this Steer channel, the case discussions, and this will start on the 10th of Feb. There is a lot of excitement, and I think you need to spread this message to all your colleagues and postgraduates. It's going to be very useful for them as well as for the practicing pediatricians. So, getting back to the main topic, first let's talk about the nephron. So you have the afferent arteriole and the efferent arteriole together forming a glomerulus inside the Bowman's capsule, and there is an ultrafiltrate that is produced because of hydrostatic pressure and osmosis. And you need to know that 20% of the cardiac output goes to the kidney. So it's around 160 to 180 liters per day. And this ultrafiltrate is totally reabsorbed, and only about 1% gets out as urine. And the oxygenation is such that the cortex has a significant amount of oxygenation. So the blood supply and oxygenation is very good in the cortex. And as you go deep into the medulla, it is compromised. But you also need to understand that the medulla is the place where there is a lot of oxygen dependent carrier mechanisms as far as the sodium pumps are concerned. And that's why this is one area which is affected when there is an ischemic injury. So, as the ultrafiltrate moves into the proximal tubule, which is divided into three segments S1, S2, S3, most of this ultrafiltrate, which could be the low molecular weight substances, the solutes, the inorganic ions, a big chunk of bicarbonate, amino acids, sugar, phosphates, they're all reabsorbed. Most of it is totally reabsorbed. And when the reabsorption is affected, for example, let me give you an example. When the bicarbonate reabsorption is affected, you end up with a proximal RTA. When the bicarbonate absorption, along with glucose, amino acids, phosphates, and other moieties are involved, it becomes the Fanconi syndrome. Now, this ultrafiltrate moves into the descending limb, and as it gets into the loop of Henle, which dips into the medulla, you have the ports, that is, the water ports opening up, and based on the osmolar load, this is permeable to water, and water seeps out of the tubules. This filtrate again moves through the tubule and then again ascends up the loop of Henle, getting into the thick ascending loop where you have the sodium, potassium, 2-chloride synporters that actively absorb sodium, potassium, and chloride. And you need to understand that absorption is along an electrochemical gradient, an electrogenic gradient, or active transporters. Then this fluid moves, but most of the sodium, that is 30% of the sodium, a significant amount, is absorbed in the thin ascending limb. And this is the place where the loop diuretics come into action. Then the filtrate moves into the distal tubule. The distal tubule is the place where the remnants are picked up and where the compensatory mechanisms take place. So, if there has been a deficiency in the absorption in the proximal and the rest of the tubule, there is increased absorption in the distal tubule. And that is the rationale for adding a loop diuretic with a thiazide diuretic to prevent this diuretic escape. So here we have the epithelial sodium channels based on amiloride and triamterene, that is, they are the ones which act on these channels, the two diuretics, and you have the mineralocorticoid based channels which cause sodium absorption um, at the expense of potassium and hydrogen. And then the fluid goes into the collecting tubules and the collecting ducts. And here, where concentration occurs, H plus secretion, potassium secretion, and a big chunk of water is reabsorbed with the help of the antidiuretic hormone based on your plasma osmolality. So let's do something very fast. First, we talked about the acid base balance. So when you have acidosis, which is normal anion gap acidosis, metabolic hyperchloremic acidosis, it's renal tubular acidosis. Proximal, a defect in bicarbonate absorption. Distal, a defect in H plus secretion. And since we know a significant amount is absorbed here and it is being lost because of the ports being defective, the absorptive mechanism being defective, you need to supplement. So the supplementation is in the form of sodium bicarbonate, sodium citrate, potassium citrate. But what happens is when you give so much of sodium, you cause sodium water retention, hypertension, and a lot of GI upsets too. So that's why we use other moieties. The citrate is slightly better, also tends to keep the calcium in solution because the RTAs are associated with nephrocalcinosis. Then we come to the metabolic acidosis in CKDs, where it is not a normal anion gap but a high anion gap acidosis, where the problem is the generation of bicarb that occurs. This is de novo bicarb genesis in the proximal tubules by the glutamate, oxaloacetate, alpha ketoglutarate pathways where there is ammonia ammonium generation is defective. When this particular thing happens, because the mitochondria are involved in a big way, oxygenation being affected, ischemic and reperfusion injuries, this is when this happens. So you need to again pump in bicarb. So what is being tried out now is a new moiety called as Vervimare, which is a non-absorbable agent which is given orally, which picks up HCl, and we are trying to see whether this can take care of the acidosis because it affects bone, it affects growth, and affects multiple systems in the body. Potassium, not to forget. Then let's talk about fluid overload. We spoke about acidosis. Now we are going to talk about fluid overload, which is usually sodium water retention. Here comes the diuretics. The most famous that we use are the loop diuretics that work on the loop of Henle. We have furosemide, torsemide, bumetamide. Bumetamide is the most potent, then comes torsemide with a long half-life, and furosemide. The problem with the loop diuretics, very potent. And what happens is the compensatory mechanisms may come into action very fast. You may get hypokalemia, hyperuricemia, and even the calcium hypercalciuria. So what we tend to do is when there is a loss of potassium in excess, we may add a potassium sparing diuretic in the form of spironolactone eplerenone. The problem with spironolactone, which is a potassium sparing diuretic working on the mineralocorticoid receptors, is the androgenic effects. The ENAC channels, that is the epithelial sodium channels, which are gaining a lot of importance because now we know that proteases like plasminogen derived ones are the ones which are causing a lot of sodium retention through these channels in nephrotic syndrome, and we are talking about amiloride and triamterene working on these channels. Now that we have combined a loop with a thiazide, you could also combine a loop with a thiazide, which also works on the distal tubule. So you can prevent the diuretic escape. Now, whatever gets into the collecting ducts and tubules is reabsorbed peripherally. You have the H plus and K plus secreting or exchanging ports. And water is also absorbed through the ADH channels, aquaporin, and urine is concentrated. Now, when you have hyponatremia, which is not responsive to many forms of treatment, and you know this is hypervolemic or euvolemic hyponatremia, you could use agents called aquaretics, which work on these ADH ports, inhibiting them. They are called as tolvaptan, conivaptan, and there is a whole set of vaptans that have come now into the market. So we had diuretics in the form of loop, which are potent. We added the mild ones like the thiazide and the mineralocorticoid ones and the sodium channel ones like amiloride, triamterene, the mineralocorticoid ones like spironolactone, eplerenone, and finerenone. And all these would prevent the escape because of the significant diuresis because of prevention of sodium absorption in the loop of Henle. The last diuretic that we forgot was the osmotic diuretics. They are like mannitol. They are given for ischemic reperfusion injuries during transplant, during cardiovascular surgery, aortic surgery. They are also given to prevent tubular obstruction like rhabdomyolysis. They basically work on the PCT and the initial part of the loop of Henle because osmotically active and they flush out the tubules. Otherwise, they are basically used for other condition. We don't use the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors like acetazolamide because they have too many side effects and they are not potent enough to cause significant sodium water diuresis. After the acid base and water imbalance, we go to erythropoiesis, where we give erythropoietin in the form of epipoietin or darbepoietin. These are given subcut or parenterally. They will reduce the number of transfusions a patient with CKD may need. Then we go to the renin system, which is also generated in the kidneys, which is responsible for hypertension, for sodium water retention, for vascular tone. And again, we block the angiotensin converting enzyme and the angiotensin receptors with ACE and ARB blockers. Again, you could have something called as the renin escape, wherein we may have to use something very specific like aliskiren on the renin moiety. But a word of caution here is when you combine the ACE with potassium sparing, you may get a rise in potassium. So also when you have something like a cotrimoxazole prophylaxis, it could increase the potassium. There are a lot of diets which are alkali based diets that could also increase the potassium. One more thing which I forgot to mention is when diuretics fail, look at compliance and look at drug interactions. Remember, NSAIDs may interfere with the action of diuretics because they have a tendency to sodium water retention. Then comes last in the list the 125 hydroxycholecalciferol. This hydroxylation takes place in the kidney, and we do know that the parathormone action on calcium phosphorus is also very, very important, especially in the distal part of the tubules. And when you have secondary hyperparathyroidism, you end up with bone disease. And in renal tubular acidosis, you have nephrocalcinosis. So we may even have hypercalciuria with loop diuretics. And when you want to retain calcium and you want to prevent loss in the urine, you may add a thiazide diuretic. So this 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol does play an important role in bone disease in renal disorders. Again, to remind you all, from the 10th of Feb, we are starting case discussion series on the same steer channel. Please spread the message to all your colleagues. This is going to be very useful for postgraduates as well as practicing pediatricians.
Don't miss the new case discussion series by the Steer team.